Oh, wow. It's normal. But it's crazy. A lot of years. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah. You're there. Are you doing still? Just working with? Okay. All right. That's good. Oh, yeah. Oh,
Virginia together?
Oh, sir, how are you? How did you go? Your granddaughter performed last week. Oh, this week? Okay. Oh, all right. Yeah, Judy and I and Ben.
You have the same name. That's a great name.
We had a nice time. All right, see Judy.
Hi, Karen. Yes, absolutely. It's Nikki's wedding.
Beautiful experience.
Yeah. Right up there. Actually, I'm just like you.
That's a good thing.
Carmen, yeah, right. Carmen, that's what.
All right.
Wow, yeah. Everything from the faculty lounge, staff. Yeah, those are interesting. Yeah. Okay. I know. I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine anyone in the position like this. Well, so it was. It is like wow, and he was very somber last Saturday.
Where are you going?
She was out.
Hi, how are you? Very nice to see you. Is that your recollection? How are you? It's been my very long time. so much anymore. I was like, yeah, it's debatable. They weren't my wedding, they're awesome. Retirement event.
And I really didn't. I never seen him do it. But he kind of did. You know, just another life. She let him so something appropriate between Bill where I want is this.
Hey girl, how you doing? How you doing, girl?
Really good. I am glad to hear that. Walked across Siberian.
Baby, how are you? Okay, did you contact us? I'm not. No, actually, I don't pray what's in his
Yeah. How you doing? Yeah, it's been around but no, right.
What's to do with you in the hospital?
It's good. It's
I haven't run into. Do you know anything with you?
Yes, correct.
Larry told me you were coming. Curtis. Larry, he's not coming. That's all good, man. That's it.
She went out, she got it.
And I feel some story I tell.
That was my favorite. I'm Mark. Good to see you. Good to see you too. Sorry for the reason.
I see this son all the time.
You know, that's me.
That is me.
She was there.
Amen.
But they liked,
She's a star student.
they liked my first. No, you have to say this one.
Good afternoon / good evening. On behalf of the Dean, Dean Paul Rose of the Law School, I want to welcome everybody here. Dean Rose is actually on campus and was in our building not long ago. He had to go to an important meeting across campus, and he was going to race back. He just texted me to let me know that he won't be back for the formal welcomes, but he does hope to join us before we finish today. So we'll have a chance to be in fellowship with him. Greetings to the family, friends, and colleagues of Professor Calvin Sharpe. As director of the Social Justice Law Center, I should say my name is Aisha Bell Hardaway. I am grateful to each of you for joining us. Please allow me the space at the outset to say heartfelt thank yous to the staff who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make today possible, to Eric Seiler, Hannah Chris, Rob Combs, and even Mr. Russell Bell, who I understand went above and beyond today. Specifically, thank you for all that you do. I appreciate you. During the next hour, we will get to hear directly from Professor Sharpe's colleagues, friends, and family members. My first introduction to him was indeed as Professor Sharpe, as I know a few of some of the others in the room had that great distinction too. He taught me labor and employment law during my second year of law school, and it was a pleasure to walk into the classroom. It was actually just the one right beyond this, before we come into this portion of the building, on the ground floor. He taught, of course, the technical black letter law, but it was a practical lesson that I learned in the classroom that lives vividly in my memory. I remember being very afraid of not performing well when my luck would run out and the cold call would land in my lap. Socratic method was indeed, I was certain, going to expose me in ways I didn't want to be exposed. And I can't really recall how the day went, how it all turned out. I just remember that it wasn't as great as I wanted it to be. And then later, a little while on into the semester, a colleague in front of me, a classmate in front of me, her number got called. And as Professor Sharpe was saying what he wanted to say to lob up the question that he was going to pose for the day's lecture, I noticed as I was looking over her shoulder that she was reading the words that were coming out of his mouth. And then she said an answer, and he was super, super, super impressed. And I was like, how does this work? Do you know what I'm about to say? So when class was over, I was nosy, I didn't mind. I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, where did you get that stack of papers? And she said, oh, it's an outline. I got it from law review. So I learned through Professor Sharpe's class a really practical insight about how law school actually works. But in addition to actively teaching me about labor and employment law, Professor Sharpe also taught me a lot. It was through our collaborative work for, in fact, this lecture, the Dr. Maya Angelou and Professor Calvin Sharpe Distinguished Interdisciplinary Lecture, Endowment on Peaceful Conflict, that I learned the most profound lesson from my former professor turned elder colleague. He imparted a truth, a nugget of peace, if you will, that cannot be found in a textbook. It also couldn't be adequately conveyed through words, although even as we were working together in 2018 and 2019, he always wrote me the most eloquent emails full of beautiful words with the most kind and thoughtful parting salutation. But it's the lesson that the chosen date of this lecture leaves me with, April 4th. As a student of history and a believer in justice, the importance, the brilliance of MLK's contributions and righting one of America's dual sins cannot be adequately conveyed. The violence that took MLK's life on this day and the time and the manner in which it was done leaves me with varying degrees of profound loss, anger, and despair. I can understand why Dr. Angelou would have found it impossible, as Calvin shared with me, to celebrate the date of her birth for a long time after Dr. King was killed in 1968. But I'm grateful that she found reason to celebrate as time passed, and that she thought it fitting to establish with Professor Sharpe this lecture. You see, it's because of this lecture that I get to spend time walking out a truth that my elder colleague, Professor Sharpe, taught me. And that is simultaneously to hold two things. The first, the well of overwhelming lament about the longstanding efforts to destroy a people, my people, who have literally given all that they can to this nation, while at the same time holding a second thing, and that is an equally deep spring of hope. Though they may seem diametrically opposed, the lament and the hope, I know deep in my knower that it takes an ability to hold them both, to carry through the work, to move forward with collective efforts to build a better nation. And I definitely need, as I suspect that many of us need, strategies for the work of justice, the work of peace, the work of conflict resolution for the betterment of us all. So planning for this lecture over the last 6 years has been an annual reminder of hope and promise for me. During that time, we've had lectures from Dr. Stephen Post on the importance of empathy and self-awareness in conflict resolution, from Dr. E. Javi Moriam on the non-litigious solution to removing Confederate statutes from public lands in Memphis, Tennessee, from Dr. Robeson Tosh Frazier, who you'll hear from again in just a moment, Dr. Lerone Martin of the MLK Institute at Stanford University, and Dr. Adrian Sebo from the University of Texas at Austin, who happens to be, among many wonderful things, also a Maya Angelou scholar, and we were really delighted to find him and to welcome him into this long line of lecturers. So in short, getting to know Professor Sharpe, getting to know Calvin, the colleague, his legacy, and to meet many of you through those efforts has been a great source of joy for me. To the family, thank you so much for sharing him with us. We have a few guests who were not able to be here with us. And for those of you who aren't able to see the room, it is really pretty full, and it makes my heart very, very happy. We're going to start with a video from Dr. Frazier, and then, as you see on the program here, we have the order of speakers. Once we're done, there will be a reception up in Ben's Place. I know the family would love to meet with folks and to have a good time of fellowship. And so I welcome us, once we adjourn here, to go upstairs to Ben's Place. Thank you so much.
Writer and professor based in Los Angeles, California. Unfortunately, I was unable to travel today to be with you in person, but my father, James Larry Frazier, is there with you, and through him I send greetings and respect to all of you. The Maya Angelou and Calvin Sharpe Interdisciplinary Lecture Series on Peaceful Conflict is held annually on April 4th to commemorate the birth of Dr. Maya Angelou and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I was not alive during the years and life of Dr. King. Much of what I know intellectually of this work, brilliance, and struggle, as well as the brilliance and sacrifices of the intergenerational collective of people who struggled with him, has been shaped by scholars, activists, educators, professionals, and everyday people like many of you who have worked to historicize, document, and ensure that this history is not forgotten. Your professional and community work and caretaking are part of the continuum of struggle and radical dreaming that King's memory and name serves as a reminder of. Now, although I was not alive during King's lifetime, I did know Professor Sharpe, and because of him was able to meet with and interact with Dr. Angelou on 2 occasions. And each of them were living embodiments of this continuum of struggle, sacrifice, peace, and love for humanity. Dr. Sharpe, or Uncle Calvin as I know him, is one of my father's closest and dearest friends. Brothers in service, purpose, art, fellowship, and community is probably a better way of describing their bond. It's funny, because whenever my father and Uncle Calvin hung out, you couldn't stop the two of them from smiling, laughing, and talking shop about a range of topics. When Uncle Calvin spoke to me, he always treated me with a level of care and intention that made me feel seen. I remember meeting with him for breakfast on a cold Saturday morning during my final year of college and receiving his counsel on my next phase of life. I was planning on pursuing a graduate degree and wanted to get his take on if I should pursue a dual degree program. At the time, I was anxious. Like most 22-year-olds, I was really struggling to make the right decision, but also desiring to pursue a life that would give me a sense of agency, happiness, and professional success. I can't even recall what specific advice he gave me, but what I do remember is the manner in which he spoke to me and the energy that he transmitted in that exchange. Deep love, dignity, a reverence for family and community, as well as for the families that we choose and who choose to love us. and most importantly, a connection to a higher purpose and power. And I think that's what he encouraged me to lean into in making that decision. Deep love, dignity, family, community, purpose, and God. These words come to mind when ruminating about the work and legacy of Professor Sharpe. This is what he communicated through his deeds, his teaching, his intellectual contributions, and relationships. One of my fondest memories with him is the first time he introduced me to Dr. Maya Angelou in her home. I was in my first years of college at the time, and at that point in my life, I primarily knew Dr. Angelou through her poetry and my mother's relationships to her writings. I also knew Dr. Angelou via her cameos in films like Poetic Justice and TV shows like Moesha. But in my head, she was more words on a page and a stack of books than real flesh, blood, bone, and spirit. But that all changed that day. She welcomed us into her house, and she was very warm and gracious. And what stood out most were her exchanges with my grandmother. They talked about so many things: their gardens, their upbringings, their families. And they spoke as if they already knew one another. And I guess in some ways they had. Like my father and Uncle Calvin's discussions, what these two women shared were traditions, ways of being and doing and living and surviving and loving and caretaking and making a way. Of navigating complex times and conditions with a sense of dignity, community purpose, love, and God that they understood was far greater than their individual selves, and which moreover connected them to one another and to so many others. In this way, Dr. Angelou and Professor Sharpe carried on the tradition of Dr. King and so many others. This series of lectures is a testament to this tradition, to this continuum. And it is in the memory of the generations that have contributed to this continuum, a collective of guardians and spirits of which Dr. Angelou and now Professor Sharpe are members of. They are our ancestors who stewarded it and whose legacy should activate us to contribute in our own unique ways, most especially amid the arduous conditions and infrastructures of injustice, inequality, state and corporate violence, economic poverty and exploitation, and environmental calamity that we face today, and which we must navigate a course through in these difficult times. Let us hold close our memories of them and the lessons they instilled in us. Let us be thankful for these times that we share with one another and with our loved ones and our respective communities. And in all we do, let us lean into those traits that were at the core of Professor Sharpe's life and work: deep love, dignity, family, community, purpose, and God. Thank you for including me in the celebration of Professor Sharpe's life and work. Peace and blessings to his family, his loved ones, his friends, and colleagues. Take care.
Next we'll have Jonathan Hinton, who is not feeling well today. He was supposed to be with us in person, but he's going to join us via Zoom. We appreciate him keeping us all safe.
Well, thank you, Professor Hardaway, and let me begin by saying how really sad I am that I cannot be with you in person today, but you don't want me breathing on you right now. Even if you don't become deathly ill, there is a good chance that you would become at least mildly ill, so thank you for bearing with me. A dozen years ago, I began a tribute as follows. Calvin William Sharpe is retired after 30 years on our faculty. These are among the most difficult words I have ever written. Today, I begin with even more difficult words. Calvin William Sharpe has passed on. Words are inadequate on this occasion, but let me try to say a little bit anyway. Calvin and I met during my interview in the fall of 1983, and our conversation that day began a deep friendship that shaped my outlook on the law, legal education, and life. Calvin helped me learn my craft. He read drafts, taught me a lot about teaching, and helped me surmount the insecurities that afflict junior faculty. Sometimes he set me straight, too, and I suspect I needed to be set straight more often than I would like to admit. An expert in labor and employment issues, as we've heard, Calvin founded the law school's Center for Interdisciplinary Study of Conflict and Dispute Resolution, CISCR. He also served as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, and he published, among other things, a leading text in labor law that you will hear about from other speakers, a pioneering casebook on international labor law, and numerous articles and chapters. Calvin also took the lead on many programs that contributed to the law school's vibrancy. In addition to Sister, for example, he organized remarkable symposia about the National War Labor Board and on public sector labor law that were published in our law review. Calvin came to Case Western Reserve in 1983 from the University of Virginia, and over the years he taught at Arizona State, DePaul, George Washington, Minnesota, and Wake Forest, among other places. Most of those positions were visitorships that Calvin took to support Jan's career as she pursued remarkable professional opportunities in her own right. He also held leadership positions in the Association of American Law Schools, the National Academy of Arbitrators, the International Society of Labor and Social Security Law, the Public Sector Labor Relations Association, the Greater Cleveland Roundtable, Cleveland Public Radio, and the Just Peace Center for Mediation and Conflict Transformation. He was a distinguished arbitrator who heard many cases involving major corporations, professional sports leagues, and federal, state, and local agencies. He also played an active role in developing post-apartheid South Africa's system of resolving labor disputes. A graduate of Clark College in Atlanta and Northwestern University School of Law, where he was an editor of the Law Review and published an outstanding note on a perennially challenging issue in labor law. And those of you who are labor geeks, it was about Gissel orders. Calvin clerked for the late Judge Hubert L of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. He practiced with a respected Chicago labor and employment firm and was a trial attorney with the National Labor Relations Board before beginning his academic career. But between college and law school, Calvin held a fellowship at Oakland College, taught history in the New York City public schools, and obtained a master's degree from the Chicago Theological Seminary. Indeed, knowing how Calvin came to the law can help us understand the seemingly diverse strands of his academic career. Underlying his work in labor and employment law, evidence, and dispute resolution was an optimistic yet sophisticated view of humanity, and of the necessity for resolving conflicts in a way that allows, in the words of Justice Holmes, people of fundamentally differing views to respect each other despite their disagreements. These biographical details suggest Calvin Sharpe's extraordinary range of interest and experience, but those represent only a small part of his contributions to the law school. Beyond his high profile in the academy, in the nation, and around the world, Calvin was always a source of wisdom. He was a generous friend and colleague on whom we could always count to find a sensible path through difficult terrain. How someone deals with adversity can be very revealing, and Calvin Sharpe taught us all some important lessons in that regard. He faced his health challenges with courage and grace. Those of us who were privileged to work with Calvin as a colleague and to count him as a friend have suffered an enormous loss. Thank you, Calvin, for everything. May you rest in peace.
Samuel Thompson.
Thank you. In my participation in the fall of 2013 in a Case Western Reserve Law School tribute to Professor Calvin Sharpe, I titled my presentation, "I Was There When It All Began." And today, I again entitle my presentation, "I Was There When It All began. Indeed, the words I wrote in that 2013 tribute are substantially the same as the words I speak today, except some comments that I am certain Calvin would want me to make. I will leave to others who are speaking as part of this tribute to Professor Sharpe the discussion of the significant contributions he has made to the legal community generally, to legal scholarship, to the law teaching enterprise, and to this law school. I knew Professor Sharpe before he became a law professor. He was a student in the first law school class of my teaching career, federal income tax, which I taught in the spring semester of 1973 at the Northwestern School of Law. As a student, Professor Sharpe made an immediate impression on me. He was uniquely interested not only in the nuts and bolts of the tax law, but also the whys of this complex law. I can remember exactly where he sat in that class of about 100 students, which was held in Northwestern's Lincoln Hall classroom, one of the great law teaching venues in the world. I can specifically remember his asking, in essence, is this a sensible rule from a tax policy perspective? Even though tax was not his chosen field, he was interested in the whys of the rules, not just the rules. Notwithstanding his demonstrated talent in discussing and thinking about tax issues, I also remember him mentioning, while in law school, his deep interest in labor law and his intention to pursue that area of law as a professional. At Northwestern, Professor Sharpe was a member of the Law Review, and I believe he was the first black person to become a member of the Northwestern Law Review. He published an article. I don't know anything about it. The gentleman who spoke before me mentioned that article with the review dealing with his chosen area of the law. After graduating and clerking for one of the most outstanding federal district judges in the country at the time, Judge Hubert L, Calvin embarked on a lifelong career in labor law by practicing in one of Chicago's leading firms, labor law firms, then working for the National Labor Relations Board, and finally teaching and writing on this topic. I generally followed Professor Sharpe's career after his graduation and after I became a member of the faculty at the University of Virginia School of Law. I contacted Professor Sharpe and urged him to think about law teaching. I also urged the Appointments Committee at Virginia to consider him for an open position in the labor law area. I am delighted to report that Professor Sharpe expressed an interest in law teaching, and Virginia offered him a position on the faculty, which he accepted. Although I departed Virginia for law practice, I kept in general contact with Professor Sharpe, and I learned that one of his colleagues on the Virginia faculty, Professor Ernest Gellhorn, was becoming the dean of this law school. I also learned that Professor Sharpe had so impressed Dean Gellhorn that he recruited Professor Sharpe for the case law faculty. Dean Gellhorn exceeded, as indicated by these tributes. Professor Sharpe served case with excellence and dignity from the time he joined this faculty. So I am pleased to say today that it is an honor to have been present when Professor Sharpe first began the study of law and first began teaching law. It is also an honor to be part of this recognition by the Case Western Law School of Professor Sharpe's extraordinary contributions to the law. Now, I know that Calvin would want me to finish these remarks, would not want me to finish these remarks without saying that it's a big mistake for law schools to walk away from diversity, from equity, and inclusion, which the Trump administration is attacking. Without this country's commitment to affirmative action, I would not be here today because I never would have been accepted at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. I am fond of saying that while I am proud to have been an affirmative action admittee to Penn, I'm even prouder to say that I was not an affirmative action graduate of Penn. I would also say that no doubt I was an affirmative action appointee as a professor at the Northwestern School of Law, my first law school teaching job. But I'm also proud to say I was not an affirmative action professor. Now, I don't have the slightest idea of whether Calvin was an affirmative action admittee to the Northwestern Law School. But I can tell you that I certainly know he was not an affirmative action student at Northwestern or an affirmative action professor at UVA or an affirmative action professor here at Case Western. I can also say that I know Calvin would be fighting mad at the current attacks on DEI. Now, in my reading of the Supreme Court's anti-affirmative action decision, it does not prevent a school from looking at challenges an applicant has faced in life and overcome. It is patently obvious that many Black and brown Americans face many challenges that the average white American does not face. One objective measure of this is the fact that both the wealth and income of the average Black American is significantly less than the wealth and income of the average white American. Unsurprisingly, in many respects, these gaps are growing, not declining. And it is clear that as a general matter, the more wealth and income one has, the better one is able to provide for the education of his or her children. This economic fact is proof positive that law schools and universities generally should not treat an applicant from a wealthy household or school district the same as an applicant from a disadvantaged household or school district. And I know that if Calvin were here today, he would encourage Case Western to find a legal way to ensure that applicants, whether they're Black, brown, Asian, Indian, or white, that have faced and overcome significant challenges will be accepted to this law school. I have made a similar argument at my law school at Penn State, and I will reinforce that argument. So thanks for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak about my good friend Calvin Sharpe and to address a topic that I know was extremely important to him. Thank you so much.
Next we have Professor Robert Strassfield.
I apologize for hiding behind my laptop. The printers on the faculty floor were uncooperative. It was not surprising, but was very sad news to learn of Calvin's passing. I'm sorry. Okay. He was a wonderful colleague, and I miss him. He had many attributes that made the law school a better place. For instance, he set the standards for sartorial elegance that few of us, certainly not me, could meet, something that I hope Professor Jensen mentioned in his article on the uniform code. He was one of those colleagues who didn't wait for a junior faculty member to ask him to read a draft. Instead, he would walk into one's office, see the draft on your desk, and say, "Oh, that looks interesting. Would you mind if I read it and shared whatever comments I might have?" And of course, I welcomed his interest and didn't mind at all. Calvin was kind and thoughtful. Because he taught labor law, he was not only a friend, but also a mentor to me. Among my fondest memories of my time here have been conversations with Calvin on labor and employment law and on so many other subjects. Whether we agreed about an issue, which typically we did, or we had differing opinions, the conversations were always collegial and directed by a common desire to dig deeply into a subject area that we both cared about and loved, and to challenge ourselves to rethink our conclusions in the hope of reaching a better, clearer understanding of the issues. There was never any posturing or competition in these conversations, just mutual respect for each other and for the importance of the questions that we were considering. I miss those conversations. In certain courses, particularly courses where the politics of law are very close to the surface, talk to my students about how I really don't want to encourage cynicism on their part. But it can be hard. Try teaching justiciability and not engendering cynicism in one's students and in, frankly, oneself. Or try teaching labor law, where you learn how much elections matter, as you teach the 4 iterations of board decisions on campaign misrepresentation, or any number of other issues. When I started teaching labor law, students would come to my office and say, "I'm thinking of taking labor law. Which side are you on?" I always resisted the temptation to break into song and gave them a kind of elusive answer. But I also couldn't imagine that any of my colleagues got such a question. So I went to my colleague, Maury Shanker, thank you. I went to my colleague, Maury Shanker, and said, "You teach debtor-creditor. Do students ask you which side are you on before deciding to take your class?" And the look on his face seemed to suggest that he thought I had fallen headfirst down a flight of stairs. Calvin was not cynical. Calvin didn't teach cynicism. He taught a method of analysis that was true to his beliefs in the rule of law. But now we live in an age of cynicism, In an age, for instance, where I would love to have a conversation with Calvin about the current administration's attempt to fire the chair of the National Labor Relations Board and to destroy the board as an independent agency. And I think I know that, so R.G. Collingwood, the philosopher of history, said, what do you do when you do history? You try to reconstruct the thoughts of the people who you are studying. So I have spent some time thinking about what would Calvin say, and I don't know what his answer would be, but I know what he would emphasize. He would emphasize the separation of powers. He would emphasize the statutory language of the National Labor Relations Act, which is clearly being ignored by the administration. And he would also, because this was Calvin, he would also focus on how does one come to a solution that people can recognize as, yeah, that's valid, that's appropriate. I wish I were able to think about these topics as level-headedly. I can't recall ever having a conversation with Calvin that explored theology, but I know that he was a deeply religious man. When a friend whom I knew to be deeply religious passes, I find myself hoping that heaven is a real place and that it will meet the believer's expectations. I know that Calvin met the expectations of heaven's gatekeepers, and that there is a spot for him there. After all, with so many people showing up at heaven's gate, bearing all sorts of unresolved earthly grudges, to say nothing of fiercely held religious beliefs that will vary from those of the next applicant online to enter the gates of heaven, there is a sore need for a stupendous arbitrator in heaven. And I also know that while harp music has its place, heaven wouldn't really be heavenly without a barbershop quartet as well. My condolences to Jan and the whole family. May Calvin's memory be forever a blessing, and may he rest in peace.
And then we'll have Associate Dean Brian Adamson.
Good evening. Thank you, Professor Hardaway. Family. My name is Brian Adamson, and like Professor Hardaway, I am a graduate of this school and had the great fortune of meeting Professor Sharpe, Calvin, when I was a first-year student here in 1987. And I want to lean into something specific about Professor Sharpe that mattered to me, and that was his blackness. I was a black man. The first black professor that I had ever encountered in my undergraduate career, in my graduate career, and even in my entire law school career. And for someone like me, that mattered. To a poor black kid who grew up in the projects in Warren, Ohio, that didn't have role models, other lawyers, let alone black lawyers around me, other than to see those who were criminal lawyers in the little town of Warren, Ohio. That mattered to me. as a young black man struggling through law school and facing all sorts of, stereotype threat. Do I really belong here? Those types of questions. It mattered seeing him there. In addition to the professors, the wonderful professors who I had there, wonderful professors, there was Calvin, who was always a source of not only light, but inspiration and advice. And he truly believed in the importance of achievement. He always taught me and told me to be very serious-minded about my work, about my studies. Now, I didn't have him for any of my classes. I didn't take labor law or employment law. That was scary to me. But above all, it just wasn't my path. I wanted to do trial lawyer. I wanted to be a trial lawyer, and I knew I wanted to be a trial lawyer the day I stepped into that place. I didn't even have him for evidence. I had Malcolm Haney for evidence, who was also a blessing, right? But in my co-curricular and extracurricular activities, moot court, mock trial as an officer of Black Law Students Association, Calvin was always there to give advice and to talk about what it meant for someone who looks like me and who is me to be in this space and to navigate this space and navigate the space others around me, right? And it was wonderful advice. It was wonderful advice that buoyed me, that kept me achieving, that kept me trying to be the best that I could be. And at the end of a semester or at the end of an academic year, he would ask me, how you doing? How did grades go? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'd tell him, yeah, it went great, or it didn't go so great, but he was always there to encourage me. So graduate, fast forward, and surreally enough, I come back to become a professor. And I know some of you can attest to that surreal feeling where you're a student, and now all of a sudden you're a colleague of some wonderful people, right? And you say, oh my gosh, how do I address them? Otherwise, I don't know, right? So, but he became Calvin, right? He became Calvin, a colleague. And at that time, I was in the clinic and around some wonderful colleagues, including Professor Kathy Hessler, Louise McKinney, Judy Lipton, and there was this nascent movement in the late 90s, early aughts in clinical legal education and pedagogy regarding restorative justice and the notion of how do we ensure that people's needs on either side of an injustice is met and at least assuaged or satisfied. And it was a type of issue of pedagogy that was informed in large part by what the work that Calvin was doing in his mediation and ADR and reconciliation work. And so him sort of breaking down that silo between if you will, podium teaching versus clinical teaching was a very important thing and a very new thing, because there was always that silo in terms of hierarchy, right? And it was that silo that also he advised me on as I moved through the academy as a clinical professor with a certain status, a long-term contract status, but also a clinical professor who wanted to go and move into tenure track teaching. And there was no space or room or opportunity here at Case Western Law School for that type of movement at that time. It wasn't a part of our policy or bylaws that clinicians would move into, if you will, podium teaching. And talk to him about that in terms of advice giving on what it should do. And an opportunity arose for me to go into a tenure track position. And talking to him about that, one of the few people I talked to about it, he said that it would be a good thing that I did that, and wished me Godspeed and told me, here are the steps you need to take. Here's how you need to think about interview process. Here are what the expectations might be with regards to writing and scholarship and also service. And it was just great advice. And so I went away for 18 years and was so pleased and thrilled and honored to be able to come back here in some way full circle. He had retired by the time I got back here, but his words of advice to me as a student and as a professor live with me to this day. And in closing, I had to say that it was only later in life or later in my career and later after knowing him, that I came to appreciate and understand the way in which religion and godliness and goodness, well, I always knew it was goodness, but his godliness and religious was part of his life, right? And this occurred to me as I was just listening to Professor Hardaway and on this day and where we are in this world and thinking about, okay, how would he think about these things? How would we think about the world today? How would Martin Luther King think about the world today? And how do we overcome, if you will? And I was reminded of these words by Martin Luther King. With this faith that we shall overcome, we will go out and adjourn the councils of despair and bring new light into the dark chambers of pessimism, and we will be able to rise from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope. And this will be a great America. We will be the participants in making it so. Hope, that was something that several of you spoke about in talking about Calvin and thinking about Calvin. And above all, I think that's what marks his character for me in terms of what he delivered for me, hope, right? Hope as a student, hope as a professor, and I am forever thankful for being in his orbit, even so briefly. My condolences to the family, and my thanks to Professor Hardaway for putting this together. Thank you.
Professor Douglas Ray.
Thank you. I met Calvin 40 years ago when we were both fairly new labor law professors in Ohio. And we formed a friendship that has been a privilege and a blessing for my life. We stayed in touch. He went on to become a famous dispute resolution expert, labor arbitrator, international specialist, etc. I went off and became dean of a few law schools, but we always stayed in touch, and we shared this commitment to what labor law and labor arbitration is about. And it's about bringing people together, having them share what they have in common, and discovering their differences are not as great as they thought. And labor law is one of those fields I think every part of life could learn from it when it works. 25 years ago, with Professor Bob Strassfeld, Calvin and I formed a partnership to write a book, Understanding Labor Law, and here too, Calvin's commitment to dispute resolution made it a much better book. As you can imagine, he chose the chapters on collective bargaining, how to get people with disparate interests to come together and sign a contract that would govern their affairs for the next 3 years. His chapter is brilliant. He's written other good chapters in there, but it helped this book go from a small student supplement treatise to what is now about a 500-page book that is used in some law schools as a text, used by lawyers and the like. And I would like to read you the dedication that Bob and I put in the book. We dedicated this 6th edition, which just came out, and it says, the authors and publisher dedicate this edition to the memory of the late Calvin W. Sharpe, an outstanding scholar, professor, arbitrator, and human being. And it's the human being part that I think brings us all to this room. 15 years ago, Calvin did me the great honor of inviting me to come to this law school and provide the introduction for his installation as the Galen Roush chair in law, and to this day I regard that as one of my greatest honors. I got to stand in your law school and tell people about all the great things that Calvin had done. But I had more than 5 minutes that time, so I will restrain myself on this time. But I would like to share my thoughts about Calvin as a labor arbitrator. It was one of his many fields of excellence, but it was a place where his commitment to justice, to bringing people together, his humanity, his compassion, made him one of the most highly regarded labor arbitrators in the country, even though for him this was a part-time avocation behind his teaching and his scholarship and all of the other good things that he accomplished. In this last issue of the newsletter of the National Academy of Arbitrators, which is the preeminent organization of labor arbitrators, there are 2.5 pages devoted to a tribute to Calvin Sharpe. I'll provide that to the family at the end. And you know, some of the biggest names in labor arbitration talk about all the contributions that Calvin made to that profession, as he did to so many professions. I'd like to tell you a little bit about labor arbitration for those who are not familiar, because it's a really important part of our labor relations environment, and it distinguishes this country from so many in the world. I taught in England one summer, and the people at the local Rover plant had a dispute. Someone had put a part-time person on the assembly line. What a horrible, awful violation that was. And the newspaper had photographs of all these people running out of the plant, climbing over the fence. You know, we're doing a job action and we are not coming back until you fix this horrible, horrible breach. In our country, unions and employers agree that we're not going to do it that way. The way it works in this country is the union will make a promise that for the next 3 years, or the length of the contract, they will not strike over disputes in the contract. They will not strike, provided the employer agrees to binding arbitration in front of a neutral arbitrator chosen by the parties. And that is what makes, or has made, our system work. As Bob mentioned, there's some threats to that system, even bigger threats than we've faced historically, but that has been the linchpin of this system, where you find arbitrators that you can trust with some of the biggest decisions, the hardest things in people's lives, terminations. Your best friend just got fired and everybody's upset about it, and we go to the arbitrator. There's layoffs. They just changed our health insurance. They denied me my vacation pay. They're subcontracting out my job. They're shutting down part of the plant and laying off the whole bunch of us. Calvin dealt with all of that. He dealt with the cases involving a day of vacation pay for the lowest paid library clerk in the county, all the way up to cases involving these multimillionaire National Basketball Association players and all of the big companies and their big business decisions. All of them brought their disputes to Calvin because they knew they would get a fair shot. They knew they would get a chance to tell their story. And that telling the story is a really important part of labor arbitration. You know, it's done in a litigation type style, a little more informally, but we present witnesses, we cross-examine witnesses, we make arguments, we file briefs, but it's about more than the outcome. And the reason it's about more than the outcome is, unlike litigation, where you can insult all these people and you never have to see them again, we have to go back to work together the next day. That means the person who is the arbitrator, they have to have human relation skills that are so far above what we normally exercise. They have to be able to read the room, because not only do we have the witness and the attorneys and the advocates, but we've got a union grievance committee over there, and they're watching everything the arbitrator does and looking for reasons to be mad at everything the company does. We've got the company people over there wondering, making sure that they're going to be heard and their business sense can be validated. But tomorrow morning, we all have to go back to work together. And that requires an arbitrator who lets this be a therapeutic and a healing experience. And that's who Calvin was. He was that to his students, he was that to his colleagues, and in all of these hearings, he helped make these workplaces better because people got to tell their story. Calvin would listen. They knew he listened. They could tell that he listened. They could tell he understood. They could tell that he knew and felt why they were feeling the way they were. And that applied to both sides. At the end of the hearing, everybody got to tell their story. And especially for people in a union bargaining unit, they don't feel like they have a whole lot of power sometimes. So sometimes I got to tell my story. I got to look that company personnel officer in the eye, and I got to tell them this. And win or lose, that releases the tension. We've got all these angry people, but somehow this hearing has to heal them well enough to get them back to work the next day. And that's what Calvin was able to do. They also need to have trust in the process. And so when Calvin would write his opinion, Calvin did not just say, you win, you lose. Calvin presented each side's argument, showed that he understood what they said, and each of their points he would respond to, and he would make it clear to them how their contract ought to be read. And just so they had confidence in the process, because I've read several of his opinions, he would cite opinions from other arbitrators. So it wasn't just, I'm Calvin and here's how it is because I'm Calvin. But no, Calvin would take them slowly and surely through the reasoning process so that even the people who lost had to admit, well, you might have a point there. And, the next, when that was all over, the process had worked. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but you got to tell your story. You got to tell your story in front of somebody you came to trust. And some industries, like the National Basketball Association and the Players Association, they said, we don't want any other arbiters. We'll just let Calvin handle all of our things. And that's a rare level of trust when you look at how important these things are and how strong those emotions can be. So, I know it's just a small part of his career, but he made a lot of workplaces better. He made a lot of people feel better about their lives. And a lot of times in his hearings, Bob Strassfeld was telling me about one of these just the other day, a Calvin hearing that never even got to the final decision because after the parties had this experience of listening to each other, they just said, oh, I think we can just settle this thing. We don't need you anymore, Mr. Arbitrator. And that's, the ultimate goal of every dispute resolution professional. Bob mentioned differences in religious beliefs, and we all have our own little avenue of things. But I think, as I before this meeting, I read up about, how do the major religions of the world feel about people like Calvin? And everywhere I looked, I saw things about valuing those who bring people together and help them better understand each other. And from Calvin's Methodist Church, we would read Matthew chapter 5, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Calvin was a peacemaker.
Amen.
Good afternoon. My name is Laura Cooper. I'm a University of Minnesota Professor of Law, Emeritus. I am grateful to the Dean and faculty of the Case Western Reserve University School of Law for their invitation to participate in this tribute to Professor Sharpe. I'm extremely fortunate that my own career as a labor law professor and labor arbitrator afforded me many opportunities to work professionally with Professor Sharpe in diverse settings and on multiple projects. Professor Sharpe was a rarity among law professors for engaging in such a wide variety of academic and professional projects and excelling in all of them. Professor Sharpe's contributions were uniformly insightful and valued, regardless of whether the task demanded pedagogical skills, historical, empirical, or analytical legal research and writing, professional association leadership, or provision of smart, practical guidance for fellow law professors. Let me give you some examples. Professor Sharpe spent a semester as a visiting professor officing down the hall from me at the University of Minnesota Law School. He was always available to share with Minnesota colleagues the pedagogical insights he gained as an experienced and successful teacher at Case Western, while also still eager, despite his expertise, to learn from others. When the National Academy of Arbitrators sought to create a treatise on fundamental doctrines in labor arbitration to guide arbitrators and advocates, it not surprisingly turned to Professor Sharpe to write a key chapter on workplace seniority. Years ago, I was asked to organize a panel for a conference of U.S. and Canadian labor arbitrators and advocates on how arbitrators should deal with advocates' misbehavior in hearings. Professor Sharpe was my first choice for a speaker because I knew he could be counted on to offer calm and rational leadership in the most difficult of situations. I also worked with Professor Sharpe when we were both members of the Labor Law Group, a perhaps unique organization of labor and employment law scholars who collaboratively write textbooks and other educational materials without financial compensation, so that the royalties gained can be devoted to projects to advance the field. Professor Sharpe was one of the co-authors of the group's path-breaking first law school textbook on international labor law. When I later had the privilege of selecting authors for a new kind of textbook that would offer original historical research and analytical insights about the most important U.S. labor cases, I was delighted that Professor Sharpe joined with a co-author in writing a terrific chapter on a case bridging labor and civil rights. It would be a mistake in highlighting Professor Sharpe's career to think that these professional accomplishments alone represent who he was. He was a person of extraordinary character, gentle, caring, empathetic, selfless, and a person of the highest integrity. It is tragic that his illness deprived him and those of us who gather here today of so much of what he and those who knew him might have enjoyed together. Thank you for this opportunity to join this day with you.
Next we have Mr. Curtis English.
Greetings.
Greetings.
In honor of my dear friend Calvin, after these presentations, I think I want to go to law school. It's an honor for me to share some reflections about my dear friend and, brother Calvin. It was right here in this building 48 years ago that I met Calvin and Janice Sharpe while catering a reception for the law school leadership and law professors. I remember Calvin and Jan being very impressed about the food service, so much so that Calvin asked if I could cater the upcoming dinner for the Black Law Student Association at his home. I agreed, and when our staff arrived there, we were treated like family. Calvin was warm and congenial, and we made everybody feel so comfortable. There I met Melanie, Cabral, the children. Stevie, I don't know if you were there. I don't think you were born yet. But at dinner with my friend Larry Simpson and Evan Morris, who I don't know is here, he told us you were coming. That was the beginning of our friendship. Calvin and I bonded immediately, based on mutual respect and appreciation, without pretense. Our friendship centered around family, community, education, and sports. And we had a shared love for music. We both were big fans of straight-ahead jazz, like my friend Larry Simpson. And we loved the Motown sound. The only difference was Calvin could sing, and I could not. But I could dance. I must tell you this story. On my milestone birthday, my family and friends, and Ann Simpson was a part of it, gave me a surprise birthday party featuring the music of Motown. Calvin was a visiting professor, I think at Rutgers or one of the universities, and he flew in to Cleveland, dressed in a tuxedo, and joined my two brothers in masterfully performing the Temptations' hit, My Girl. They did such a wonderful job that the venue was at a hotel, and some of the guests at the hotel walked by the ballroom, and I heard one man say to his son, "Son, you were watching the Temptations." I will never forget it. While Calvin's professional achievements that were so outlined previously are impressive, if not legendary, they do not fully capture his true nature and essence. The biblical phrase, "man cannot live by bread alone," is often cited to convey that people need more than just food. They also require art, music, literature, ideas, and more to live a life in abundance. Calvin understood this better than most, evidenced by his many interests and dimensions. Cal was kind, wise, charming, distinguished. Calvin moved through life with grace and compassion, strength and courage, even when his health declined. When Calvin retired, he and Jan moved to Arizona. And I went out there after to help them get settled. Hi, Karen. And he had over 250 bank boxes of files of his body of work in his garage in Arizona. My charge was to get each box, take the files out, and take it over to Calvin and let him take a look at it. Now, mind you, Calvin's body at this point had betrayed him. Only way he could communicate was with a cell phone, and he would text. So the first day, I got through about 50 boxes. The next day, Jan pulled me to the side out of Calvin's eyesight and said, "You don't have to go through all those boxes. Just get some." Within seconds after she said that, my cell phone went off. I looked at it, it was a text, and Calvin said, "Don't listen to her. I'll tell you what to get rid of." And I told this story to someone before, but after 2 days of going through all those files and reading all those documents, that some of the documents and case studies, probably some of you lawyers in here that Calvin taught was in there. evaluations of cases. I won't tell anybody, but I saw a lot of it. When finally I finished, I told Calvin, I said, I learned enough about law to take the bar. One of the things that Calvin used to tell me, when I would ask him, how do you do all that you do? He said, I learned to do good while you're doing well. My brother Calvin did well, very well. And I'm incredibly thankful and grateful to be blessed to be a part of his orbit. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Stevie Sharpe.
Okay. All right. So I'm Stevie Sharpe Jones. I'm Calvin's youngest daughter. I was born here in Cleveland in 1985, so probably, after he got here. I really appreciate everyone being here to celebrate my dad. Your love and support mean the world to our family. It would mean the world to him. And so I may not have the words to adequately express how lucky I am to call Calvin Sharpe Dad, but I'm going to do my best as he taught me to do. So May 9th, 2024 will always be the day that I lost my hero. But my hope is that I continue to find ways and times like today to celebrate the amazing man that was Calvin William Sharpe. Calvin Sharpe with an E, born in February 1945 in North Carolina, third son to Mildred and Roush Chair. From a very young age, it was clear that he was just that, sharp. Smart, harmonious, affable, resilient, passionate, and excellent all around. Growing up, he focused on his studies and prioritized doing well in school, while also being captain of the basketball team, a singer in the Methodist Church, a member of the Boy Scouts, and a friend to many. In all areas of his life, Calvin showed up with enthusiasm, integrity, and the highest standards, as many people have spoken about today. He did not shy away from a challenge. In fact, he ran towards them. Graduating from Ridgeview High School as valedictorian, he then went on to graduate from Clark College and eventually move on to graduate from law school at Northwestern University, where he served as an editor of the Northwestern University Law Review. Not surprisingly, Calvin did go on to achieve much success in his career as a lawyer and a law professor here at Case Western Reserve Law School, as well as many other places. And as you've read, I'm sure you've read the obituary that was beautifully written by my sister Adrienne, he lived a very big, successful, beautiful life. Throughout his life and career, my dad was always mission-driven. He was committed to service, consistently championing peaceful conflict and alternative dispute resolution. At his core, he believed in healthy debate, but more importantly, he believed that despite our many differences, there is always a peaceful path to understanding, compromise, and resolution. He tirelessly worked to embody and instill this belief in others, both professionally and personally. And it's this ethos that made my dad tireless in his career as a labor lawyer, arbitrator, and professor, but it's also what made him a dedicated son, brother, husband, father, uncle, grandfather, friend. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. He moves through this world with grace, with kindness, and with the perfect amount of swagger. And while I'm glad that everyone knows that. And while there's undoubtedly a seriousness about Calvin, he also knew how to let loose and how to have a good time, whether that meant traveling the world, singing in a barbershop quartet, trying a new fabulous restaurant, cutting a rug on the dance floor, going to Sedona Jazz Fest. He lived life to the very fullest. My dad was always eager to make authentic connections, and he did so with ease. Throughout his life, you would be hard-pressed to find someone someone who had a negative opinion of him. He used to say to me, and I feel like Curtis, I think it was Curtis, said something that was very similar just now. He used to say to me that no matter what you're doing, do well, and excel. And he absolutely practiced what he preached. Even through a punishing illness, his commitment to excellence did not waver. He continued to enter every single day with a smile, with optimism, with laughter, with wisdom, and with joy. In work, in family, and in life, my dad was determined to make a positive impact, and that he certainly did. So my dad taught me how to make the most of this life. He was the absolute best person I knew. His generosity, spirit, love, energy, and wisdom is unmatched. He taught me that vulnerability makes you the strongest person in any room. He was never afraid to shed a tear, to say I'm sorry, or to say I love you. He showed me how to always work towards, expect, and ask for more. He taught me how to truly enjoy the special moments and experiences that life is made of. And while he may have worked a ton up in the cozy den that was his office in our home, and he did work a ton, he always made time to celebrate with friends and family, to sing in his barbershop quartet, to make a trip to another country. My dad set the bar so high, and I hope that he knows that I'll never stop striving for it. My dad affectionately called me his BBD, brilliant, beautiful daughter. He always made me feel capable, important, intelligent, even when the world made me feel small. My dad relentlessly lifted me up and never ever let me forget how much he loved me. So I will close by saying thank you to my dad for guiding me expertly through life, for protecting me while also pushing me outside of my comfort zone, for teaching me to work hard, smile big, laugh loud. I'm able to enjoy every day the way I do because you taught me how. I love you, Dad, and I will carry you with me forever.
I am Melanie Adrian Jones. I do use my middle name now. Calvin was my second dad. He married my mother. And I didn't really like him very much at first. I was 3 or 4, and I thought his kisses were kind of damp. And, he was a little bit overly enthusiastic, in my opinion. And, Poppy, which we negotiated and ultimately is what I refer to him as, took me on as a daughter, and in a way that did not interfere with my relationship with my own father. So there were no stepfather politics. I never called him my stepfather. You would know he was my second dad because he was not. As a result, I got this second dad, and because he, without being prompted, looked out for the things that I needed, I got my third dad, Curtis English, who my mother Janice and Calvin recruited to be my track coach when I was the only person running track for Hathaway Brown School for Girls. I got all these extra dads. And Calvin seamlessly integrated me into his number of kids. So he had 3 kids. Ultimately, once my sister came along, he saw me, he listened to me, he took me to the mall all day when my sister was being born and then snuck me into the hospital. He sent us to the forum. You probably don't know what that is, but did you go to the forum? Because I went to the forum to get my life together. Once I started running track, he came to basically all of my track meets, you know, around the city and downstate. And he encouraged me through high school, through college, through law school, through graduate school. I have in this notebook a printout of his career advice that I keep on my desk, where he told me to focus on tenure and to be collegial and to take 5 or 10 minutes before I presented. And he said if I did these things that I would always be good. I want to say, you know, to our question today, I think these comments go to, you know, what would Calvin say? And he really showed me an example of self-care and equanimity. And these are things that he improved upon over the 40-odd years that I was blessed to know him. And yes, even when I visited him and he was unable to talk or move, he laughed and enjoyed my updates and was extremely communicative and continued to be loving and supportive. And I believe he is here today. For me, he continues to be a presence and, you know, someone who is guiding me through this life. I have, for the last several years, worked on showing up here for this interdisciplinary lecture that is endowed for peaceful conflict that he founded with Maya Angelou, who I would refer to as Aunt Maya. I wore this jewelry today, which I received after she passed away as a gift, something that she wore. And just the other day, I received a message from Stephanie Floyd Johnson, her son's wife, and the Maya Angelou Endowment made a donation to the Interdisciplinary Lecture Endowment on Peaceful Conflict, which I would really like to encourage everyone to do. If there is a specific link, I will share it in this coming week, but the giving page on Case Western Reserve's law website allows you to designate your donation, and in an effort to keep Calvin's energy of peace alive, I wish that everyone would donate so that we can continue to do these lectures. Because today, as many of you have noted, there is more than a need for what Calvin would advocate for. And one of the things that I will say is that Calvin was willing to work with you. And if you were funky and not ready, he would simply wait. And he would wait. And eventually your energy would rise. And then there would be the work. And we are in a situation today where it seems abysmal. And I think he would ask us to hold our presence, hold our hope, and continue to do this work. I would like to thank Hannah Christ for this slideshow. I would like to thank Eric Seiler for helping make this program come together. Robert Combs, whose son is here, but who always gives me Calvin love when I come and does the media. I would like to thank Dean Rose for hosting us, and former Professor Bob Lowery and Lou Katz, and Dean Rawson, who was here when my dad was here, and Dean Gellhorn, who invited him to come here from Virginia. And I would like to thank Laura Cooper and Douglas Ray and Samuel Thompson and Jonathan Enton, who is my dad's dear colleague, and Bob Strassfield, and you all, not only as his colleagues, but as his co-authors and writers. I would like to thank Aisha Hardaway for working with me to put this together. I really appreciate Case Western Reserve University recognizing my father in this way. It is very pleasing, and I just really want to say thank you. And if I have left anyone off the list, please understand that I do mean to include you, because this, for me, for my family, my mother couldn't be here today, but we appreciate this. Calvin loved this place. And, you know, his work is a testament to how comfortable he felt here and how willing he was to do the work, I think, of interdisciplinary peace and love throughout his career and life. So, thank you very much.
In closing, Adrian forgot to add that, thank you so much, but you want to...
Oh my goodness, you guys. Yes. And then I also forgot to say Brian Adamson, who's my colleague today. I teach at Morehouse College. I am a lawyer and a political scientist. So I wanted to point out that this poem that I got from Stephanie Floyd Johnson is written by Guy Johnson about Calvin. So that is on the back of the program. So I didn't know how much time we would have, so I had a sprint. Should I read it? Okay, fantastic. And I want us to have a little time to commune. Yeah, and if people have some more time to talk, you know, that would be fantastic. So many things, so much Calvin. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll go up to Ben's place. For those who are in chairs, there's an elevator that will take you, straight upstairs. And then the rest of us will go, there's a stairwell here, a stairwell, middle stairwell, all the stairwells will be there. But we'll just be right over in this corner of the law school. Thank you all.